like to welcome everybody this morning. I'm Lexi Dearborn. I'm the chair of the Landscape Designer Sector Group. For those of you who haven't met Margot, Margot is one of the planting gurus of our Landscape Designer Group. Oh, look at the look on her face. I'm going to let Margot take it from here. I hope you enjoy the seminar, and we'll talk soon.
All right. So before I get started and go into native gardening and plants, I just would like to talk a little bit about why we need to choose natives over non-native plants. So this is a graph that you might have seen in other presentations. If you were at the plant symposium last week, this was shown on one of the presenters' slideshows, and it is quite disturbing. It's the decline in the insect population worldwide. Now, this was published in 2019, so what it is doing now, I don't know. But our insects are very important, which I'll talk about a little later. And we're also seeing a decline in bird population. So if you like birds like I do, then this is a concern because the birds, they're kind of like the canary in the mine shaft. As Dr. Amanda Rodwald says, if we need to remember that if conditions are not healthy for birds, they're unlikely to be healthy for us. So we need to really rethink how we live and how we garden too, because gardens are very important for birds and for insects. Habitat loss being the main reason why there is the decline in both insects and birds. So habitat, what is it? Habitat is really the natural environment that the birds and insects can live in and breed successfully in. That's important. They need to be able to breed. Otherwise, there will be no generations of these birds or insects later on. And this includes, of course, food, water, shelter, breeding, and raising a healthy brood. A healthy brood is important because if they're a sick brood, they won't survive, especially if they're migratory birds. They will not survive the migration. So they need to be healthy and strong. So for native birds, this means that they need native vegetation, trees, shrubs, perennials, grasses, ground cover, etc. And for native insects, it's mostly shelter. They need the shelter of leaf litter. They need the shelter of dead wood and undisturbed soil too. They also need food and host native plants that they can lay their eggs on and that their larvae can feed off of. So if you see caterpillars on your plants, don't freak out. They're actually good. So unless they eat the whole plant, then they're not good, but typically they won't. They'll eat just a small section of the plant, what they need, and then they'll mutate into their insect form, mate, pupate, and start that whole cycle all over again, depending on what the insect is. And you have to remember too that both native birds and insects have evolved with our native plants over centuries. So they have developed a relationship with these plants and they know what they look like and they know what they need from them. So if we are not planting these native plants, the birds and the insects won't be coming to our gardens. And if you like birds and you like seeing baby birds flying around, that is important. You want to have them there. So the effect of insect decline, well, obviously, a lot of the insects are the heavy lifters for pollination. And without pollination, we won't have our orchards pollinated. We won't have our vegetables pollinated. There would be a decline in fresh food. And there are some plants that can be wind pollinated, like corn, but we cannot survive on corn and potatoes only. If we do not have the pollinators and they're not doing their job of pollinating the plants, we will slowly die of disease and it'll be a long, horrible death. Pollinators can vary from our native bees to bumblebees, butterflies, moths, mosquitoes, yes, mosquitoes, hoverflies, and tiny insects that we don't even notice, and more. Mosquitoes, just for your information, they actually do pollinate a small orchid in boggy sections. So in the Muskoka area, that's where they are, and Northern Ontario. So they do have a purpose. Some pollinators are species specific, which means that they survive on one plant or one species only. And one that comes to mind and everybody knows is the monarch butterfly, who survives on the milkweed species. So the monarch butterfly is a very interesting butterfly because it basically has 3 generations as it migrates from here down to the south and back. So along that route of their migratory route, they need milkweed along there, which is why they're starting to see the decline in them, is because the milkweed in the Midwest has been um, removed due to pesticides or herbicides. So that needs to stop, and or maybe not stop, but decrease so that milkweeds can grow again, so that the butterflies have a place to rest, feed, and to start another generation. Birds decline because they rely on insects mostly. Some birds in particular, that's all they eat, like flycatchers. If you have flycatchers nesting, which I am lucky enough to have them nesting around my house, when you're watching them catching flies, it's a real aerobatic display. It's really fascinating. I'm fascinated by it. My husband, not so much. Um, and the birds, when they are mating and breeding their uh, and raising their brood, they need a lot of caterpillars. If anybody has seen Dr. Talamy speak or read any of his books, you will know about the chickadee study that he did, where the chickadees have to feed their babies. They feed them solely or mostly caterpillars. And the caterpillars are a perfect baby bird food because they're soft and squishy, and the birds can just jam them down the throat of the baby birds, and there's no harm to the baby birds. So these little caterpillars, well, this one's not quite little, it's a big one, but the little caterpillars that you see descending from the trees on a silk thread, they're important for the birds. And our native birds keep pests in check too. So if we have aphids, well, no, aphids, that's ladybirds. Insects that or pests on my vegetable garden, for example. There are a lot of birds that go into my vegetable garden, and I don't really see a lot of pests on my vegetables. I don't see anything on my tomatoes or my potatoes because the birds take care of them. So now that we know why we need to plant more natives, we need to think about choosing to plant a native garden. Um, So we need to plant gardens more ecologically. Right now, the way we plant gardens, it's not ecological. It's plants that we like to have in our garden. It's not plants that other wildlife need. So we need to think of our gardens not just a place for us to enjoy, but a place for the wildlife that shares our land around us. They need to enjoy it as well and survive on it. And a native garden could be its own ecosystem. So you don't, and when it's its own ecosystem, there's not a lot of maintenance that needed when the garden is established. I mean, you still need to look out for the odd weed, but it does kind of self-sustaining. A formal garden like this one, that is not its own ecosystem, and it's not self-sustaining, and it's very high maintenance, and it probably has 0 insects and birds visiting it. Maybe some nesting birds, but that's about it. So we can choose a type of native garden that we want, and you can do a combination of this, just so long as there is, according to Doug Talamy, if you only use 25% of ornamentals, non-natives in your garden and the rest all natives, then you can still have a plant that your clients really, really, really love, like a hydrangea. You can say, okay, we can give you a hydrangea, but it can only be this many. So keep it at 25%. So now we need to choosing native plants. It's more than just saying, oh, I like that plant. I'm going to put that in my garden. You need to look at a whole other range of objectives too. And native plants can be anything from ground cover all the way to very mature trees. This picture that I have here is the Claytonia virginica, which is ephemeral that grows along the Bruce Trail here in I live in the Grey County area. So I have the Bruce Trail running through my property, and these are plants that I see in early spring, and they have the smallest little insect that visits it and whose pollen it can only eat. So this is an important plant for that insect. And once it dies down, the insect would have done its feeding and its next stage of development. Native plants also need the right conditions to grow. Just because it's native doesn't mean it's going to grow in the shade or in the full sun. You need to know what the plant conditions are. The light level, the moisture level, the soil, the type of soil. And I got questions too about where can I buy native plants. More and more of the garden centers are providing native plants, although not always what you want. You should try to get in touch with native wholesalers. They will, there are a lot of local growers, and I'm sure there's some in your area. And if you contact them, they might not be able to sell to you, but they could tell you who they sell to. And you can go visit those garden centers. Or if you get a big enough group together, you can buy some of their wholesale plants. So you do have to do some footwork and look around to find a good one. And I already said the 25% rule. And that native, yeah, once the native garden is planted, it does need to be established. And, depending on what you have in there, it could be a year to 2 to 3 years for trees and shrubs. And then after that, it's just the odd invasive species that pops up and a weed that you don't want that you do need to pull out. So, but it would also be very enjoyable going through your garden because you will notice the birds and the insects and the pollinators. I love just standing and watching bumblebees try to squeeze their fat little bodies through a tubular flower. It's quite neat. We need to take into consideration the hardiness zone. This is the Canadian hardiness zone map, and this is the province of Ontario. This is the most up-to-date one, and from the one that I had before, the zones are warming up. So you could go to this site. The Government of Canada has a site, and you can actually select your municipality, and it'll tell you what your zone is. It'll tell you your zone now and what your zone was in past hardiness zone maps as well. In Ontario, our zones range from 0 to 7B, with 7B being a very small area down near Detroit, Windsor. Don't know where that is. And another map that is quite handy as well is an ecoregion. This is just another tool we can use when selecting native plants. Plants tend to grow in ecosystems or ecoregions, which has the same kind of ecosystem that they need, the characteristics of. So that could be the climate, seasons, topography, the bedrock, the type of soil, and also the plant community that they grow with. And the animal community. They're used to growing with the animals in these ecoregions. So there's a website called Homegrown National Park, which I use quite a bit in this slideshow, which is a website developed by Doug Tallamy and others to help you create your own homegrown national park. So his idea is that if every gardener creates a native garden in their property, then we could have as much space as a national park, which is dedicated to native plants and the survival of our insects and birds. So it's a very interesting website. I would highly suggest go on it and just go through it. There's a lot of information on it. And this is just a shot of Ontario and our ecoregions. So we have our Southern Ontario is in the ecoregion of 8.1. And then just north of us is 5.2. It doesn't make any numerical sense to me, but whatever. And then above that, which I don't know if anybody is in the 5.1 region on this call, but it is good to know what ecoregion you are in. And you can go on to the Homegrown National Park and find out what plants are in the ecoregion that you are in. The other thing too, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Keystone plants. That's another thing that Doug Tallamy talks about is keystone plants are native plants that support many different insect species. The oak tree is one of the top of the keystone plant list. It can support over 900 different species of insects and butterflies and moths. Goldenrod, although it can be a bit of a thug in your garden, the other goldenrods also support a high number of species as well. So the Canada goldenrod can support up to 122 butterflies and moth species, and it's an important source of nectar in the fall for our insects that are starting to migrate, like the monarch butterfly, or the insects who are, about to hibernate into the soil. Willow species is also is high up in the keystone hierarchy. It supports a lot of insects, but it's also an early bloomer in the spring. Their little catkins attracts a lot of the early pollinators. And so it's very important for our ecosystem. So if you go back onto the Homegrown National Park website, you can actually input your postal code. Yes, they do accept postal codes, even though it's an American website. And they will show you a list of keystone plants that will grow in your postal region. This is just a small selection, just 3. There was a page and a half of information that I got. And the information, if you click on the photo, it'll give you some information about the plant requirements and some characteristics. It's not a lot of information, but it's a place to start. And having keystone plants in your garden is a good starting spot. But we don't want to plant non-native invasive plants. We need to stop planting these. And one of the questions I got was, why are garden centers still carrying them? That's a very good question. The Ontario Invasive Plant Council is working with garden centers and growers to eliminate these invasive species that are still being sold. A lot of garden centers will put on their tag of the plant, this is an invasive species. Why they're still selling it, I don't know. But if enough, well, they're still selling it because people buy it. And if people stop buying it, then they won't be selling it. So it's really, we need to educate the public about why they shouldn't be using these plants. And it's up to us as designers to let our clients know that goutweed is not good for your garden. They don't support any species, any insect species. They spread like crazy. They suppress our native plants. And there's a lot of information on this website if you're concerned about invasive species, or if you think you have some on your property, you can get this information about how to deal with them. The best management practices are good, and the technical documents are also very good. So you can also download this brochure from that website, and it's a great tool to give to clients as well if they're humming and hawing about getting more native plants in their garden. Also, you need to revisit this site every now and then because they do update their invasive plant list. So we're going to look at a few of the invasive plants that I'm not fond of. The top one is the burning bush. Although it looks spectacular when it's this red color, most of the year it's not that great looking. The flowers are very small and you hardly see them. And the birds eat the berries and carry them into our natural forests, and that's where they do their damage. They create an understory that it crowds our tree saplings, so it halts our forest regeneration. It also smothers the understory trees, our native understory plants, and they don't support any insects or pollinators. So instead of planting this, try planting these. The aronias, they are beautiful spring flowers. They have the berries that the birds love, and you can eat them too if you can get them before the berries or the birds do. And then they have a red color, red fall color. Another option is the weather rod or the Viburnum casinoides. It's native to Ontario. Both these are native. and with multi-season interest as well. Spring flowers, berries or drupes, and then this turns a red purple color in the fall, or even orange red. Barberry, another one I don't like because it stabs me when I'm working in a garden, and it's starting to spread into our forest. I notice it in my maple forest. So that's one of my jobs this spring, is to go pull it out. But because they have those lovely needles, thorns, you need to be well protected when working around these plants. Um, Again, they don't support any insects or pollinators, and they are um, affecting or acidifying the soil where they grow, which affects our native plants. So again, we need to get rid of this. This one's native to Asia, so it shouldn't be here. Instead, you could plant arrowwood, which is a viburnum dentatum. Again, it's got the beautiful flowers in the spring and fruit that the birds will eat. And then in the fall, you've got your yellow and or red purple colors. It is also the host, both of these viburnums are the host for our native spring azure butterfly. So you need to, some growers or plant sellers are starting to list what plants what larvae or caterpillar this plant is the host plant for. So what that means is that butterfly lays the eggs on the plant and the caterpillar eats the leaves before they turn into the butterfly. So very important for the survival of the spring azure butterfly. The other viburnum is the viburnum lantago. Now these ones can get big, but you can prune them down to a size. There are other viburnums that you could put in, but I've just, stuck with two plants to start with. Vinca minor, not good. It's native to Europe, should stay there. This one can spread out of your garden, into your lawn, onto your driveway, into native forests, down riversides. It can go anywhere. And it just, as you can see, there is nothing else growing there. It smothers anything in its path except for trees, which it'll start to climb on too. So it is one to be removed, and it is a nasty one to remove too, because it will start to root or grow from its tiniest little bit of root that's left in the soil. Um, the best method is to use tarp and solarize it over a season or two. Um, but then it looks ugly, but that's what you kind of have to do. Um, or just don't plant it in the first place. Instead, there are some beautiful native ground covers that you can use. The wild geranium, this one, the Geranium maculatum, it's got beautiful spring flowers. The leaves are very interesting, and it can grow in under maple trees. It's a really good plant to have, and it will form a ground cover, so it will find its own way through the other plants that you plant there, and so it's a very nice plant in a shady area. Another one is the woodland phlox, which um, can take some sun. Well, I was surprised by that. It's planted in our local hospital garden, and I thought it wouldn't survive the summer heat that we had, but it did. So it's pretty hardier than I thought it would be. Like a phlox, it does need good air circulation to reduce powdery mildew. And this will form large colonies and of a ground cover, and so it will suppress weeds as well. Whoops. Okay, here we go. Goutweed. I don't like goutweed. Goutweed is also not native here. It's native in Eurasia. It spreads underground by rhizomes, and it's going into our native woodlands. It's going into your lawn, onto your neighbor's lawn, into your neighbor's garden. It just spreads everywhere. And it's another tough one to get out. Again, it will reroot on tiniest bit of root that's left in the soil. So again, just don't plant it in the first place. It will outcompete any native plant that you have, and it will smother uh, non-native plants like astilbe and hosta. So it's get it out of your plant, out of your garden. Instead, you can grow these ones, a large leaf aster. Now, this is a native to Ontario and it's ground cover. It's got large leaves, and when it's in flower, it gets a little taller, and it has these beautiful white little star-shaped flowers. Um, so it's a great one to have. And then the wild geranium again is also a good one. And it might even be able to battle some of the goutweed, but it'll be interesting to see. There are some native plants that can outcompete some of our invasive species, but not a lot of them are in the shade. The one that comes to mind, I can't remember it now. It's a yellow flower. It'll come to me. So native gardens do need maintenance as well, especially when they're in the establishment stage. So remove any non-native invasive plants that pop up and any weeds that germinate. Um, the important thing with native gardens is that you do not cut them back in the fall. You don't clean out your garden in the fall. It's very easy. Fall maintenance is easy. Do nothing. Unless it's a rose shrub with long whippy stems that's going to whip around in the winter winds. Those ones I do cut back so it's not going to be as whippy. But flowering stems like the echinacea, the milkweed, the monarda, they all stay up because the stems of these plants and even some of the shrubs that have a hollow pith, the insects will hibernate inside the stems, and that's where they stay for the winter. So you don't want to remove their winter hibernating space. And in the spring, when you do feel like I need to get out there and clean up my garden, don't cut back these stems until it's about 10 degrees Celsius consistently. And that means during the night too. So that it gives time for the hibernating animals to wake up and to get out of their little cocoony area and to fly away. When you do cut back the stems, a good method to use is a chop and drop. That's where you chop it into stages of about 4 to 6 inch pieces, and that just drops onto the garden floor. And it'll deteriorate into the garden and add nutrients to the garden. Also, the plants will, in the spring, they're growing quite quickly at this stage, so they will grow and cover up the unsightly chopped up stems very quickly. In the fall, leave the leaves. Do not clean leaves off of the garden. Instead, I actually collect leaves and add them to my garden. Because if you want garden plants or native plants to grow, they need the soil that is best for them. And the soil that is best for them is the soil that their leaves are dropping down onto, breaking down into, and the nutrients from their leaves are feeding the next year's plants. So the leaves from the native plants are the best fertilizer for that plant. So don't remove the leaves unless, well, if it has powdery mildew, then they say to remove it, but I don't either, because it's usually not too bad. And I'd rather have the nutrients from the leaf into the soil. Also, the leaves provide winter protection for the insects, as was mentioned in an earlier slide. The insects will burrow into the leaf litter, and that's where they will overwinter. And again, you need to wait until it's over 10 degrees before you remove any of the leaves. Sometimes the leaves are very thick and you do need to remove some. I still try to leave a layer of leaves because it's an excellent mulch. You also should add some deadwood to your gardens because there are pollinators that nest in deadwoods. So it's great just to put a decorative log in your garden, and they'll find it. Also, you need to leave some bare ground for nesting, our native nesting bees. Don't put too much mulch over it because that smothers them. I use 2 inches or less of mulch, and then the bees can find their way through. Or just leave a patch that's bare for them to find. If you see in your garden soil or your vegetable garden soil, a patch of bare soil with holes in it, there's holes in the soil, that is a nesting site. And it's usually might be for our native bumblebee. So leave it, don't think that you need to cover it up. So now how do you design with native plants? It's a little different too than what we were taught as designers. The same thing, you need to know your site's moisture level, the soil, the light, and you need to know what plants can grow in that moisture, soil, and light. But you also have to remember that native plants have grown together with in a plant community of relatively the same plants. Um, and they share the same small space with their roots. So there isn't a huge gap between plants and there isn't, oceans of mulch. Instead, there's oceans of flowers. So because they're so tightly planted together, um, it's a slightly different design process too. So in that ecoregion information, you will find plants that will work together. Plus further down, I talk a little bit more about that. Um, Instead of choosing plants for their big, beautiful flowers that probably don't pollinate anything, think about how the native plants will interact with the flowers and with each other and with other animals. There is a website that I've gotten a lot of information from called In Our Nature, and Sean Booth is the owner of that, and he said for me, "Yep, go ahead, share my information." So I'm sharing it. Um, he has developed these garden types that have specific plants that are in those garden types. So if you determine what your garden type is, then you can narrow down your plant search quite substantially. So some of these garden types is prairie, which was once all throughout southern Ontario. They are dominated by a 50-50 mix of grasses and wildlands with no shrubs and with no trees and shrubs. The soil is usually not that nutritious and it's sandy or clay in dry areas and in full sun. Meadows, it's a more common ecosystem here in Ontario, as 70% wildflowers, 30% grasses. And they usually grow in low nutrient soils, but also in richer soils, but not too rich. And they can grow in moist to dry areas with sand, loam, and clay, and in full sun to part sun. Wetland, as the word says, it's wet or very moist. Low-lying areas such as ponds, rain gardens, and the soil is moist and wet, and it could be sand, loam, or clay in full sun, part sun. The woodland edge is a transition zone between forest trees and the meadow, and it's a diverse mixture of wildflowers, grasses, shrubs, and small trees. The soil is moist to dry with sand, loam, and clay, and in part sun to part shade, but can take full sun if there's enough moisture. All this information is on the website of In Our Nature, so you don't need to madly write it all down. Forest garden is, as it says, it's a forest with mature trees, and the understory of the forest is shady with and moist, and the plants under there thrive in full sun, or sorry, full shade to dappled shade, moist to dry conditions as well. And usually they like rich organic matter because of all the leaves that come down from those trees, deteriorate and create a really nice soil. Boulevard garden. This is because there's more interest in planting boulevard gardens. So he's created a garden type for that. So these are human-made gardens or areas that the boulevards are close, usually right along a road, usually dry soil, compacted soil, some pollution probably, and road salt, and usually in full sun. So you need to find some really special natives that will grow there, but there are some and they will tolerate these low growing conditions. Oh, you also need to keep the plant height low so that there is a sight line for cars and people to walk through. You need to check your municipal bylaws before designing and planting to find out what their height restriction is, whether you can even plant a boulevard garden. Most municipalities are allowing it now, but they do have some restrictions, so you need to check. Dry shade. Yes, we do get dry shade, and there are native plants that will grow there. Some will even grow under Norway maple, which we should not be planting either. Um, but you can improve dry shade by adding compost and leaf litter. And even clay soil, if you have really hard clay soil, are plants that can bust that soil, native plants. So one question I had was about formal gardens. How do I use native plants in formal gardens? And it is possible. You can do that. Um, but even both native and non-native plants can be unruly. So you need to choose the best plant for the garden location and the style and understand how the plant grows. So you need to understand how it spreads. And in formal gardens, you don't want plants that spread too quickly. So the categories, there are four categories, and there's the clumpers, the light spreaders, the medium spreaders, and the prolific spreaders. The prolific spreaders you do not want in a formal garden. You do want the clumpers and the light spreaders with a few of the medium spreaders. So the clumpers, as the name says, it keeps its clump habit and spreads very slowly. Plus, it's more a tap-rooted plant. So tap-rooted plants, once they're planted, they don't move. So you need to make sure they are planted in the right spot because to dig them out is a pain. Light spreaders, they spread faster than clumpers. They still do a clump form, but they spread by rhizomes, although not aggressively. And they do form small colonies and self-seed a bit. Medium spreaders, they spread by rhizomes, runners, and seeds to form colonies across a landscape. And you have to check the plant density. Where am I saying here? You need to keep these plants in check so that the seeds don't take over or don't dominate. So that's why medium spreaders, you don't want to use too many of those in a formal garden. Yeah, I'd already said that. Keep the height uniform in a formal garden because humans like to see the view. Usually the height is 3 feet or lower. You can put in the odd plant that's 4 feet tall if you need to. But the general uniformity of height keeps the visual sight of the garden. It looks like it's neat and well intentioned. Okay, I already said that. So a plant community in nature, plants are not separate from each other. I did mention this for a few slides ago, but they grow in a very diverse, interwoven community where their roots are also interwoven, and they are compatible with each other. They grow well together because they're used to growing with each other. They also look good together. So landscaping with these plants, you need to have the same plant community in order to keep them healthy, really. And they also look good. They work harmoniously together, create visual harmony and a sense of peace, which is quite nice to have. And so for example, if your garden has the growing conditions of a meadow plant community, focus your plant selection on meadow plants. So I'll talk a little bit about the meadow plants shortly. When you're doing a formal garden, you want to have signs of intent. So that means that the garden is being well maintained and it is intended to be like this, but not messy and floppy either. So you don't want to have aggressive native plants. Even though they have high wildlife value, the common milkweed and the goldenrod will look messy in a formal garden. With the goldenrod, you can use another species besides the Canada goldenrod. There are some more goldenrods that don't quite want to take over the world. When you're designing with intent of the garden, it also gives signs to your neighbors and bylaw officers who may not appreciate these plants as much. So the cues that shows that you're designing with intent is pathways. So formal pathways, which could be mowed lawn or paving stone pathways, um, neat edges, even cut edges, benches so that you could sit and watch all the pollinators visiting your garden, arbors, statues, and even a sign to promote the ecological benefits of what you're doing with your garden. The pathways create a formal aesthetic framing for your garden, and it makes it gives the cue that yes, I am taking care of my garden because my lawn is cut. Um, so you're trying to make native gardens relatable and intentional, and which can uh, bring out an appreciation for native plants um, instead of the more traditional landscaping. Plant densely, because with the plant communities, they're used to being tight together, and they want to be tight together. If you plant them further apart, that's when they start to get floppy. So you need to give their roots some competition, really, in order for the plants to stay straight up. So one plant per square foot. That's quite a few plants, and it helps keep the formal garden aesthetic because all the plants stay upright. Some plants don't quite look good through the whole season, like the aster, for example. Um, when it gets tall and it kind of loses its lower leaves, so the bottom of the aster plant can look not very attractive. But if you're planting with dense plant community like this, you can plant lower growing plants in front of it, which will hide the unattractive stems of the iris, and nobody will notice it. Um, I already said that about that. So like I said before, if you have wide spaces between with mulch, the plants will start to flop over onto the mulch. So we need to plant densely to suppress the seeds, so you don't need as much mulch. Bloom succession. We do want to have flowers from early spring to late fall because our pollinators need food from early spring to late fall. Um, so the goal is to have 3 to 5 different plant species blooming each season. And it can be a challenge, but it's very doable with native plants. This is a columbine plant, which hummingbirds love. It's amazing. They grow by my pool, and I was swimming with hummingbirds flying by and feeding off of the columbine flowers. It was really very spiritual. Um, So you have to plan to always have a plant blooming each season. Um, it also makes the garden look intentional, formal, and neat, and your visitors and neighbors will enjoy the blooms as well. You can adjust the number of blooms from 3 to 5 if your garden is large enough, but it's not recommended in small to medium gardens because it can look messy or wild. So stay with the 3 to 5 guideline. 3 to 5 plant blooms 3 to 5 species blooming per season guideline. Embrace nativars. That was a question I received as well about nativars. There's a lot of debate about nativars and whether we should be using them, whether they're useful, whether they're not useful. There was actually, oh, I discovered a error. That should be plant, not pant. There was a study done by Ann White, who's a landscape architect, and part of her thesis was she studied nativars. And she found that most pollinators will prefer the native species over nativars, but that's not always the case. Some nativars may be comparable or even slightly better than the native species. And to use a nativar in your garden should be evaluated for each garden and what you are trying to achieve in your garden. So if it makes sense, you can use them. For example, the New England aster, it can get very, very tall and leggy and is not the best plant for small formal gardens. But you can use the purple dome cultivar, which is a compact bushy alternative, and it all has all the same ecological benefits as the species. So it's a good plant to have. So don't shun nativars. Just if the sorry, back to the nativars. If the cultivar of a native species changes the leaf color or the flower shape, then the insects won't come to it because they don't recognize the leaves and they don't recognize the flower. So the flower needs to stay the same, and the amount of nectar it produces needs to stay the same too. A lot of our echinaceas have there's a lot of cultivars from our native echinacea, and the pom-pom echinaceas have removed basically the nectar producing sections of the native plant and created bracts instead. So there's really not enough nectar for a native plant to feed off of those pom-pom flowers. Plus, they can't get down into where the nectar is. There's too many bracts in the way. So you need to keep the flowers as close to the species as possible. This is just a quick list of plants that you can use in a formal garden. This is on the in our nature website, so there's a much longer list, but there's some good plants you can use. This one is a pink milkweed, and a monarch butterfly is enjoying it. So now that we know the plants that we want, how do we plant them? So matrix planting is the way to work with native plants. Because there's rarely bare soil between our plants, native plants in a plant community, they have to be densely packed, and every niche is covered in different layers from ground cover to tall trees. So to design for that, you need to use this matrix method, which I had heard in a number of different talks, but I never knew what they were talking about until I found the website in our nature. He has a very good section about the matrix planting. So I highly suggest going to his website and checking out all the information he has. It's just a treasure trove of information. It's a practical system that's used to translate natural principles by arranging plants in layers of different heights, bloom times, and ecological rules. And the method of arranging plants so that multiple species can share the same space at different vertical and seasonal levels. It creates a garden that reduces bare soil, suppresses weeds, supports pollinators year-round, maximizes seasonal color and structure, and is less routine maintenance. That's always important. So the matrix garden functions as a self-sustaining ecosystem while providing beautiful, structured, and enjoyable gardens. There are 4 layers to matrix planting and design. The architectural layer, this is the backbone of the garden. So these are the tallest plants. And the traits are very strong stems, so they don't flop. An appealing silhouette, so it looks attractive to look at. Persistent seed heads, so there's something to look at again after the flowering is done. A clumping habit, so it doesn't spread too crazily. And long-lived, so you don't have to keep planting it. Composition in the architectural layer is trees and shrubs mostly. Trees and shrubs in forest gardens and taller forbs in meadows or prairies. The next layer, oh, sorry, I skipped through. So this is the tall plants is only 10% of the number of plants you're planting. So it's not a huge number. So plant them as normal, as we normally do, plant them in odd numbers. You can also add bird baths or statues as complementary focal points, because these tall plants are a focal point as well. So you can add other focal points. The seasonal layer, this brings color, texture, and seasonal interest. It's a seasonal progression. So this will change over the season, providing the blooms that you want every season. It's the traits are long bloom periods, interesting textures, seed heads again, multi-year lifespan because we don't want to keep replanting them, interesting foliage, and it's ideal. This layer is ideal for clumping natives. The composition is mostly mid-height perennials and forbs that complement the architectural layer. And this is usually 30 to 40% of the plants planted. These are planted in clumps or drifts to mimic a natural growth pattern. Ground cover layer. So this covers the empty spaces under trees and shrubs instead of using mulch. This is also very important to create a soft landing for caterpillars. Soft landing is a number of native plants that create a ground cover that when caterpillars drop down from the tree to go move into the soil to continue their next stage of development, they can actually get to the soil through the native plants. When they drop down on a lawn, it's very difficult for them to get into the soil. So we want to have soft landing for these caterpillars, and the matrix is a very good way to design a soft landing or develop a soft landing garden. The ground cover is also a green backdrop to all the other flowers. There are flowers on some of these ground covers. The wild ginger, the flower is there, it's just underneath the leaf. But it's mostly the green backdrop, which helps make the flowers, the seasonal flowers pop more. So these are low growing, dense, spreading, and they fill gaps under taller layers. We want them to spread into the taller areas. This is grass, sedge, ferns, and lower, I can't say that word, forbs, rhizomes. It's 40 to 50% of the planting, and these plant under and around taller plants. The filler layer, this quickly fills in gaps and it prevents weeds and supports natural succession. So these provide immediate cover. They're fast growing. So while the other plants are taking some time to establish, you have a colorful garden starting already. They're short-lived annuals and biannuals, so they will slowly die off as the other seasonal layer starts to fill in. These are planted in clumps of 1 to 3 across the site, and they are just jammed into the spaces that are there. Plant usually plugs or sow seeds. This layer will dominate until the garden is established, and these annuals and biannuals will fade away, but will pop up if there's any undisturbed soil in the future. So the plant spacing, a general rule is to plant a plant, or to plant them 1 feet apart or 30 centimeters. This spacing allows plants to interlock with their stems and their roots, creating a continuous living mulch to cover bare soil and reduce weeds. The taller plants are slower growing species may need more space to allow for their mature height and size, which is why you plant the ground covers underneath them and the fillers. Clumps and drifts should be planted in uneven numbers to mimic nature and for organic flow. I'm almost done here, Lexi. Architectural layer. So this is a little brief showing of what their matrix looks like. So these green circles are the tall plants that are being planted in this garden. They're odd numbers, spaced to the full mature size of the plant, and again 10%. So not to overwhelm your space too much. Seasonal layer, this is the mid-height plants. And these are the ones that'll flower in different seasons. There's usually 3 per season, yeah. So these are the smaller green circles, again, planted in odd numbers and in clumps that look natural and in drifts. And they can overlap with the architectural layer where height allows. And this is the ground cover layer shown as the grass picture, even though they're not all grasses. So these can be low-growing sedges, grasses, ferns, and they create a living mulch. And just so you know, sedges do support their larval hosts for a number of different insects. And they suppress weeds too, and provide wildlife habitat and control erosion. Ground covers can also be seasonal plants with spring flowers. Usually ground covers are spring flowers only, but the non-natives are usually the ones that flower later on, so we don't want them. And this layer is 40 to 50% of the plants, and you can choose, you can plant them close to or under tall trees. And then this is the filler gap. This is the filler layer. This is the annuals and the biannuals that you just jam in between so that there are no bare soil showing. And you can plant 1 to 3 again in odd numbers. And these are shown as the red and purple dots that are all around. Again, these are the temporary plants, which will naturally disappear as they're being outcompeted over time. And a seed bank will be established as well. So if there is a disturbed area, something will pop up that you would like. So successful garden tips, start small with a section of your garden to experiment with matrix planting, such as a ground cover soft landing for caterpillars underneath a tree. You can incorporate a ground cover layer into an existing planting as well to create a green mulch and replace the wood mulch. Prepare the site as you would a traditional soil by removing all weeds and weed roots organically. And you can also apply a thin layer of mulch the first year to protect the young plugs, but don't smother them. No mulch on the plants, please. And also choose plants from your ecoregion and make them your design foundation. In the beginning, you can use ground cover layer and build up from there. And the small pots are better for ground cover layer because they tend to grow better from that, and it's more economical since you're going to be buying a lot of them. And the slower growing architectural plants, which are usually bigger anyways, you can buy in larger pots. So that's my presentation, and these are the resources I used. There is definitely more information about native gardening on the matrix gardening in our nature website, and also the I don't have the Doug Tallamy's thing in here. I'll add that. And you should visit Doug Tallamy's website, the national plant website. I can't remember the name of it now.
So I'm going to say thank you, Margot. Margot, you got lots of really good thank yous and claps and stuff happening. So
thank you.
I think I covered everything.
Great. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Like I said, there is more information on these websites, so please visit them.
And I've been looking these websites up as you're talking about them because some of them I didn't know. So
yeah. Oh, the Homegrown National Park. That's the other website that I forgot.
There you go. Have a lovely day, everybody, and enjoy the sunshine or the snow, whatever's happening in your region. And oh, there we go. We got a whole bunch of people clapping in. Thank you, Margot.
All right. You're very welcome. I will. You too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.